morning and happy Wednesday. This is our favorite midweek moment. Thanks so much for joining us. On today's episode, we're going to be talking with Sonny, Shelby, and Jessica. They're going to have a conversation about leadership, taking care of yourself, and being a working mom. Let your friends know you're watching by hitting that share button. Now let's get ready for this week's episode.
So along the lines with the leadership thing, I was thinking about how I remember going to church, and I grew up in church, so total opposite perspective. But I remember going to church as a child and it being a really big thing that women were not allowed in leadership. If you are a woman,
Really?
you're not supposed to be in leadership. You shouldn't be on the platform.
You're not that old.
Well, but
It was that style of church.
It was that style of church,
Okay,
right.
okay.
And even in internship, I had a friend who was dating a guy who went to church who was like, you shouldn't be in an internship where you're learning to be in leadership. Like, it's just not right. And there was just, always this big friction. What do you think has changed now? Because now we see all kinds of women, if not more women in leadership than we do see men in leadership now. What do you think has changed and shifted?
Well, I think the church, if we're willing, will shift to the methodologies that change in culture in the world, and we just have to be careful that it lines up with the Bible and not just do everything the world does. But there's progression happening in the world that's just, we're smarter and more enlightened and more open these days to doing what is right and seems normal versus what our grandma and great grandpa and all of them did just out of ritual and routine. So I think we push the envelope, everybody these days, to go, yeah, but what about this?
Right.
And when we look at the Bible, there were women that did ministry. Mary Magdalene was a disciple. She was a disciple. That's why she was the first one that Jesus was revealed to at the tomb. They were not dating. There's some weird Da Vinci Code movie and they tried to say that, they actually were a couple. No, they weren't. Jesus didn't have a romantic relationship, but for sure they were close, and that wasn't his mission to come and get married. So I'm sure there were temptations with women. I mean, it says Jesus was completely tempted. So I'm sure there were lines that Jesus didn't cross, and maybe it's been more in the past out of fear that if we mix men and women on a team or on a church staff, like, will there be too much temptation? Or maybe it's just really old thinking to go, women are, they can't. And it's not just a cliche that behind every great man there's a great woman. When you put two together to do ministry, the Bible says one can put 1,000 to flight, two can put 10,000 to flight. If I didn't have Sean, I wouldn't be who I am and have done what I've done, and vice versa. If Sean didn't have me, we wouldn't be here. And so this is not just a worldwide belief movement. This is a biblical thing. Lydia had the money to support and start a church and become a church plant out of her home, probably meaning she had a massive house. In fact, the Bible says she had a couple homes. That was never the case. You lived in a one-room house if you were just a normal person. And she had multiple homes, and probably her large home could house a church, like one of the first churches, the first church, and she was a part of a church plant. So I think that where we've come is we've actually dug into the Bible, not just dug into what society say about women, but we've dug into the Bible and realized, it wasn't just 12 guys that were with Jesus. It talks about his disciples, and there were more than just men.
Good. That's good.
Yeah, so good. So talking about growing up in the church, did you ever reach a point where you were like leading people who had been there longer than you or older than you? And how did you, find the confidence in leading those people?
I'm trying to think where I just talked about it. Maybe it was with Season on a video recently about learning to lead people who were older than me. And it started when I was married to Sean at 17, just got married that early because I graduated high school early, and we went to Bible college, met at Bible college, got married. I was 17 years old. And so we're third year in Bible college, and we go to do an internship in Tacoma, Washington. And I became the leader of teams, and some of the youth kids were my age because they were still helping out. They were hanging around for the summer. They're 19 and 20. and I'm 19 and 20. But also the first or second year of Bible college, I was 18 and I became a coach at a local high school for the dance team. So I'm 18 and there are most of the team's 18-year-old juniors and seniors, and one girl's 19. And I mean, yes, I was married, so we didn't talk about my age, but I knew my age was younger than them, and I was for sure intimidated, and it was a big thing to get over. But realizing that I could do it, I think has helped, so that now, I mean, you lead people, and you lead people from the worship team to Adventureland, that they're 10 years, 20 years older than you, and I think when we treat everyone great, and we're not thinking in hierarchy with age or hierarchy with position, and we just treat everyone kind, age becomes a non-issue. And I think that's inside the church and outside the church. And so I've seen you guys do that really well, and I think that's what's important.
There are so many women in leadership in so many different segments of the workforce. Both men and women bring value to the workplace. I love that Sonny talked about how her and Sean complement each other as leaders. One's purpose is not greater than the other's. They share the responsibility of leadership and lead where they're gifted. Give us a thumbs up or a smiley face if you are a leader in the workforce. Having leaders who are also Jesus people has such an impact in the working environment. Now let's get back to that conversation with Sonny, Jessica, and Shelby.
So I'm going to change the subject a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about self-help versus self-care.
That's a good one.
Because right now, self-help is like the big fad right now, right?
And has been probably for a decade.
Right,
and
right.
It's
but
bigger
I
now.
feel like it's getting bigger and bigger now, and I have friends that are like all about this self-help thing who are Jesus people, but it's so hard to, I don't know, how do you approach the self-help versus self-care thing, and the fact that all of these, there's all these conferences now. What do you do when you look for new books, new Jesus books, because it is important to take care of ourselves, but how do we differentiate coming from a self-help versus self-care?
I love that you brought it up, and I've never thought of it or heard it posed that way. Self-help versus self-care, one is not possible and one is possible. Self-care is possible. We can learn to care for ourselves, and the Bible gives us direction on what that looks like. Self-help is not possible. I cannot help myself. God can help me, but whenever I try to step outside of Jesus' help, and I get other people's advice, or I try to come up with my own thoughts apart from the Bible and Jesus, I'm not going to help myself. And that's why self-help keeps getting bigger, because well, that one didn't work. Just like I think cookbooks and diets continue to get larger on the bookshelf, because if there's still a bookshelf, I mean, you go to Barnes and Noble all the time, there's still bookshelves. And social media probably is what's blowing up the whole self-help thing and the self-care thing more and more, and it's in our face. Self-help is something that is pointing out, oh, I can figure this out. I read this book, I can help myself. And I think you can have great supplemental reading, but it needs to be about how to maybe understand the Bible or the way of Jesus to learn how to do good self-care. And the Bible will help us. So that's all we need. Some people get overwhelmed though, like the Bible, and I don't know, it's so confusing. And I think that if we go to authors who aren't just like, oh yeah, I was raised this way, or I'm a Christian, or I've been a Christian, that's not enough. Like, we have to research the authors. If I'm reading a book, it has to be really researched, not by my friends, because I can put out there all day long, here's my stack of books, what else is a good summer read? And I get some crazy stuff, like, sorry, I'm not looking for a dark horror novel, but I'm also not looking for an author who halfway claims Jesus and halfway just thinks she's the guru. That is not okay either. So self-care versus self-help, one is not possible. I will never help myself. That's why I have to go to Jesus first. He goes, Sonny, this is how I'm going to help you. And there's some things you need to do that are going to create self-care routines so that you can have your affection stirred for me and more of me.
So kind of sticking with the self-help versus self-care. So I have a friend who went through this big traumatic life experience, and I feel like she has kind of turned to this self-help, vision, and this whole thing has kind of sucked her in. And I never comment on things. I never am like, you really shouldn't probably be reading this book or blah 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 blah, because I don't want it to kind of discourage her, because I feel like she's kind of using
Searching.
that as her, like, this is what's helped me, this is what got me out of that type of thing. What would you say to her in that circumstance?
Well, I think always talking to someone through a relationship is better. Always
Right.
talking to someone through a text privately or a call or a Marco Polo or a Voxer, whatever we do, is always going to be more effective than a comment on the feed, because then you invite all kinds of other opinions and
Right.
rebuttals.
Right.
And here's the thing that I always have to remember is that people will respond negatively to truth, not because they're evil, but
Right.
because our flesh resists truth. So you could put truth in the feed, and you will have more comments on that than people who were given, oh, my new favorite show, Walking Dead, Stranger Things, Game of Thrones. Nobody will say a thing.
Right.
You put, oh, I've just started only watching the Bible Project videos. Oh, there'd be so much hate, or
Right.
at least judgment. So I think it's always better in a closed communication or face-to-face, but in a relationship, for you to say to her, maybe text her, because she lives not in town.
Right.
And just say, hey, I noticed some of the books. I have some suggestions. I'd even send you one if you want. And then maybe that opens it up. It's not saying I have some stuff instead of that. I also
Right.
have some things I can send you. And you're putting the effort. So it's not like I'm just going to give my opinion and I'm out, but I'll put some effort towards this.
Yeah.
And I think if they got to talking, there's a real famous popular book right now, and then a second one followed it up. And I've had people text me the cover and say, what do you think about this book and this author? And I've said, I know enough to know that it sounds good, and it's very tickling and pleasing to the ear. It's very relatable. And then once you're in it, I've had people who are good Jesus people with solid foundations say, I was hanging with it. And then at the end I went, wait, that doesn't sound like the Bible. That doesn't sound like the right advice. That sounds
Yeah.
like that's actually not truth. And so then I can say what I've heard is that can kind of go awry. And maybe then through the third conversation, you're able to share that with
Right.
your friend about particular groups on what you've heard, what you've read.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to actually just go read all the crazy stuff out there, so I have a book review on it.
Oh, that's
I don't
good.
even want
That's
that
good.
in me.
Right.
Some people feel obligated. Well, like that's popular right now, so maybe I should watch that whole series.
Right.
Or that's popular right now, so maybe I should read that book. Sean and I back in the day were youth pastors in Memphis, and our kids were so crazy about the Blair Witch Project. But we had sworn off horror movies because we felt convicted about it.
Yeah.
We're like, why would we want to be used by God as pastors to speak life into people, but then we're inserting darkness, evil, nasty, fear even. And so we made that a standard for us. We didn't make everybody use that standard, but our kids in the youth ministry were going to the Blair Witch Project. So Shauna and I, over the course of months, would go into the video store when there was more than family video out there, Blockbuster and all that, and we'd come out and say, I didn't rent it. I wanted to. They had a ton of them, and the next
Yeah.
time the other one would come out. I almost rented it. I didn't. We were totally keeping each other accountable, but totally interested.
Yeah.
And one night we gave in. We watched the Blair Witch Project. We were so scared when we shut it off. And it's not just because it was scary, although it was because we walked out from under what God told us to do, and we just went to do out of research.
Right,
We got
exactly.
into it.
Yeah.
And we were so scared. Neither of us wanted to get up to turn the lights on and go to bed. We did end up finally getting to bed, praying over our house. I mean, we were like, oh, Jesus, help us. We're so scared. And then he woke up to me the next morning or early morning, punching the air, trying to mutter, but my mouth wouldn't open enough. In Jesus' name, in Jesus' name. I had such a demonic dream and such a pressure on my chest that I felt like I was being pinned to the bed.
Yeah.
And it's that we open that crack in our home. You know, if you have kids, you open it to your kids. And on a smaller level, these self-help and these just non-Jesus things, they open you to this universal thing that people think that is a crack. It might not be evil horror movies, but it's not truth. And I think that that's where Satan goes in the subtle, it's helpful.
Right.
When really it can forever shift the direction of truth and Jesus in your life.
Yeah.
Researching authors before jumping into a book. That's great advice. If you're not sure who an author is or how sound their advice is, then take the time to find out about them. We always have to be on guard with what influences we allow in our life. And help your friends out too. Who's influencing them? Let them know about what is worth reading and what is not. Check out this commercial for another way to get more Jesus plus life in your week. When you add Jesus to your life, don't be surprised when your life changes. And with change come a lot of questions. That's why we're starting a conversation about the journey. You can join Sonny Hennessy, author of Jesus Plus Life, right here for a conversation each week. You'll hear questions from Jesus people just like you. Questions about living everyday life with Jesus. Every Tuesday you'll get the latest conversation. You can subscribe wherever you like to listen. Jesus Plus Life, the podcast. The Jesus Plus Life podcast is a great way to bring Jesus Plus Life with you everywhere you go. We have new episodes every Tuesday. This is a life-giving resource for you and your friends. Now let's jump back into this week's conversation.
So I recently have been on this kick since we got back from girls' retreat. I felt like we got Season's book, which was awesome. It was so helpful because for a long time I really struggled with I don't want to get up early. I'd rather sleep.
Yeah.
Why do I want to get up early?
It makes me love Jesus more when I get sleep.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a better person when I'm sleeping. But it really convicted me to start that, and not that I have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. But to set a time to, have some quiet time with Jesus. And I read through Season's book, and it was super helpful to have that guideline, to not know, because at first I'm I don't even know where to start. I'm not a huge reader. And so it was perfect. It was perfect for that. So I've been consistent with that since girls' retreat, and just finished Lisa Turker's Unglued book, which is awesome. And I felt like every page is she's talking to me right now.
Yeah,
that's
she's
me.
Great. Yeah.
So with the whole unglued thing and coming unglued, because we both have kids, littler kids, and every day at times feels like I'm gonna come unglued.
Yeah.
Do you still feel that now that you have teens?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it better? Is it worse? Is it different?
It's just different.
Yeah.
I just talked with Dana in a previous Jesus Plus Life, and I said, what I'm learning more having teenagers than I had to put into practice having little kids is that I need to quit expecting that I'll know what to expect. Whereas as little kids, you kind of go, okay, let me be ready for the next stage. With teenagers, the hormones don't allow you to expect or get what you're expecting ever. Because when they're having a day, we're talking teenage issues, teenage years, all the pressures, because they now are living in pressure.
Yeah.
Plus hormones. Literally, it's just out of control. But then you have days where you're like, this is the greatest, this is easy. Plus they're in their room or they're doing their own thing. So half the time you're like, I have all this self-care time.
Right.
So that's awesome. And then they come at you and they're like, you're never gonna let me do anything. And I'm like, my gosh, I'm letting you do 30 things that I don't wanna let you do. So I've learned to just go, just like when I can get hormonal or I can have a bad day, I have to realize some of it, I don't even need to have a very long conversation. They're working through it, and now it's verbal rather than throwing fits or screaming. It's just verbal.
Right.
And I have to endure and listen. And some things I'm just like, I don't want to know this, or I want to have a long talk where I do all the talking, and frankly most of the time they want you to say one word and they want to do all the talking. So it is just different. And coming unglued is when it's like, well, why can't I go to the movie alone with that person? Because that's called a date. No, it's not called a date. You don't understand. It's going to a movie with a person of the opposite sex alone. That's a date. And so we want to escalate, and they just want to, no answer is going to be good unless it's yes.
Right.
And so it has changed. And yes, I'm sorry. It'll never be a time where you don't feel like you are going to go unglued. I'm sorry.
Thanks for raining on the parade.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
you said that they're coming to an age where you have to let them do things that you don't want them to do. How do you determine like which of those things you're going to let them do and which ones they don't get to do?
Well, Sean and I are not always their favorite person, and we've learned that's okay. We're not here to be their best friend. We want to be, and there's days we feel it, and it feels that way, and it is that way, and there's days we're just not their favorite person. So the times I'm willing to not be their favorite person are when I can see things that they're headed towards, that this decision will lead to this, will lead to this. And honestly, Isaiah or Aubrey dating too early, or like giving their heart away, and they're like, the most, like Isaiah has got a girl he likes, 3 months, he's like, the most we've done is a hug. And I'm like, and what I want to say is a hug leads to kissing, kissing leads to making out, you know, and they've heard me say that. I have to admit, I have just gone through the whole list. But now I'm just like, they think it doesn't add up. But the earlier, if your 11-year-old has a girlfriend, and then your 13-year-old is dating, is getting dropped off to date, and then your 15-year-old is like full out, going steady, hanging out on the couch downstairs all the time, one thing leads to another. So I'm okay to not be the favorite on the things that will add up. It's the stuff like social media that I wish that they weren't on, but I'll let that go. But then there's standards, or there's times we pick up their phone and they know it, or we take it right from them. Like, let me just look. Like, I'm not going to try to sneak in your room, but let me look. And then I'm like, why did that person say that? You don't talk like that, do you? And I mean, you have to not escalate. So it is picking and choosing, but it's for sure the things that build on to lead to impurity, that lead to addiction, that start with just this itty bitty, not a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were those standards that you had set before they got to these ages, or is it something you just go with the flow
Oh, this
and take
hits
as
you?
it comes?
I don't know about parents of other teenagers. This hit us like a gravel truck. Like, we're like, whoa. Because you get used to being the parent of kids. And they're kids. I mean, even if they're 2, when they're 9, they're just still kids, and you get used to the crazy. And then they're like people that have good reasoning skills, and they can talk you into or out of anything. And you start to find yourself going, wait, I'm getting outsmarted. So no, I had no idea how to prepare. And now we just go, just don't freak out because this happened and you didn't expect this to happen. Help them, Pastor Lori talks about all the time, help them fail while they're in your house rather than you don't let them do anything so they go fail in college.
Right.
Because in the dorm room, there's nobody to give solid advice.
Right.
It's just different. I love that they talked about it. Parenting doesn't get easier or harder, it just gets different. That's such good perspective to have, so you aren't trying to shoot past one stage to get to the next. Enjoy each stage you're in and know that it will just be different. If you're a parent, comment what stage you're in. Are you in the preschool years, the preteen years, or maybe you have adult kids? Let's talk about that with each other. You can keep commenting as we continue to watch the rest of this week's episode.
So let's talk about the working mom situation, because there's a lot of working moms. We're all working moms, and there's a lot of balance that has to come with being a working mom. And even though you have kids that are teenagers and can stay home alone, and we have kids that are little and need childcare and all that, like there's this balance that has to happen with mommy being at work and then mommy being at home. How do you handle that?
The word balance, we did a whole conference, summer nights conference, mini conference in our second building, and it was called Balance. Balance with Jesus, balance with kids, balance. Well then, like the next month I hear a message by Christine Kane on social media, and she's like, there is no such thing as balance. And you know, and I'll tag her in this, because this is how there is no such thing as balance. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we just did a whole conference of breakout sessions about balance. And I mean, she was like showing in the Bible, And I'm like, oh man, I blew that. There is no such thing as balance. So then I was like, okay, what do I think about this? And then this really tied it together at GLS the same year. T.D. Jakes was being interviewed, and he was being asked by Bill Hybels, like, how do you do it? You have homes and developments and businesses and TV shows and the church. How do you do it all? Like, how do you balance it? And TD said, you can't balance all that and do that all. He said, but I never rob from the same bucket 2 weeks in a row. And I thought that is freeing.
Yeah.
Now I want to do everything really great,
Right.
but I have even noticed in my scheduling appointments, I schedule less appointments week 2 if week 1 had a ton, because I can't rob from my kids and getting home on time and just my own sanity 2 weeks in a row.
Right.
I will have, if I have, like, I'm going to a Broadway thing with Aubrey in Milwaukee this week. Well, next week. Well, this week, Aubrey and I aren't going to do like girl days because I need to get some work done because I'm going to leave early on Wednesday to take her.
Right.
And so I think even explaining that, you know, even little kids, even a 4-year-old can go, okay, this is a busy week for mommy and daddy.
Yeah.
Next week, we're going to focus on us. We're not neglecting our children and we're awful parents because this week got crazy,
Right.
because we have a plan. And they go, oh, you're going to make a way to prioritize me next week.
That's good.
And then the next week you have a little bit of grace and you're like, and now it's me time. I'm disappearing and my husband gets to handle it. And then the next week your husband needs a little time because
Yeah.
you stole from that bucket this week. That was really freeing. Abby Engelbert told me this. She's so funny and quirky. She said, you know, there's no such thing as multitasking. I learned this. She said, when you're watching TV and you're doing something and you're reading, she said, your brain actually can't do all 3 at once.
Oh.
It actually will shut off from the show to read the book, or it'll shut off from the book to catch what was just said on the show. That it's, you know, our brain isn't able to do those 3 things. We just steal from one to get the other done.
Wow.
And I thought, man, does that line up with
Yeah.
even what T.D. Jakes said?
Yeah, that's good.
If you were multitasking while watching this, you can go back and watch it with your full attention by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can actually rewatch and share all of our Jesus Plus Life episodes on YouTube. We can't wait for next week as we bring you another brand new conversation. Be sure to set your reminders for 8:30 a.m. Wednesday morning. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.